Imagine raising your child for decades, only for him to look you in the eye and say, "There's no family here." That night, he vanished, but what he didn't know was that we were already closing in on him. You're not going to believe how it ended. The thud was so heavy it rattled the light fixture in the hallway. I froze mid-step on the landing, my heart skipping like it used to before giving an exam to a class of restless year 11s. Upstairs, a suitcase had hit the wooden floor. I knew that sound. It wasn't the gentle pull of luggage for a weekend trip. It was the desperate slam of someone leaving for good. As I climbed, the smell of cold rain clung to the air. The sash window in the spare room must have been left open again. My knees clicked on each step, but I didn't slow. At the top, I saw him, Daniel, my only son, the man who, once upon a time, had carried my shopping home in the crook of one arm while holding his baby with the other. Now, he was bent over the bed, shoving shirts into a suitcase with the force of someone stamping out a fire. Beside his foot lay the shattered remains of a photo frame. Claire's smile caught mid-laugh behind the spiderweb of broken glass. He didn't even glance at it. "Work trip," he said without looking up. As if the words were a lid he could slam on the moment. But his voice was cold, rehearsed. I've spent 35 years teaching teenagers to spot a lie in Shakespeare's soliloquies. This one was embarrassingly thin. Before I tell you what I found hidden in his jacket pocket that proved this was no work trip, do hit subscribe. I've got more stories than I ever wished to have, and I promise you they only get more unbelievable from here. He zipped the case with a sharp motion, the sound slicing through the air like the gulls on Cromer Pier. My eyes dropped back to the photo on the floor, the one he stepped over twice without a pause. Claire's anniversary was next week. He hadn't mentioned it. A cold unease slid down my spine. Something bigger than a row or a midlife wobble was happening here, and I was about to find out just how far from family my own son had drifted. The suitcase stood there like a silent witness between us. Daniel's hand gripped the handle, his knuckles pale against the worn leather. "Where exactly are you off to?" "Then," I asked, keeping my voice steady. Years in a classroom had taught me how to mask panic, but inside, my pulse was loud enough to drown out the rain on the window. "Just away." "For a while," he muttered, eyes flicking to the door. "Away." I stepped closer, the crunch of glass from Claire's photo frame under my slipper making me wince. "Daniel, this is your home. Oliver's upstairs doing his homework. You don't just vanish and call it away." His jaw tightened. "Mum, don't start." "No, I will start," I said, my voice rising before I could stop it. "You've barely been here as it is, and now you're packing in the middle of the week without so much as a— Oliver will be better off here with you," he cut in sharply, his tone the final mark on a page you can't erase. I stared at him, the words not making sense. Better off without his father. "Don't twist it," he snapped, finally meeting my gaze. His eyes were flat, like slate. "There's no point pretending. Mum, there's no family here. There hasn't been for years. You're just playing house." The phrase landed like a slap. I actually felt my cheek warm, though no hand had touched me. "Playing house." My voice cracked on the repeat. "Daniel, I raised you in this house. I raised Oliver when you were too busy working late, or—" He yanked the suitcase upright, the wheels squeaking. "I can't do this anymore. I need a life. My life, not this charade." Charade. As if birthdays, scraped knees, Claire's funeral, all of it had been some sort of theater performance for his amusement. "Does this life you're rushing off to have a name?" I asked, my words bitter but shaking. He froze for half a second, just long enough for me to know there was an answer he wouldn't give. The sound of a page turning broke the moment. We both looked towards the living room, where Oliver sat at the table, bent over his exercise book. The lamplight cast a halo on his hair. "How long will you be gone?" Oliver asked without looking up. His voice was quiet, almost too casual. Daniel swallowed. "Not sure. I'll call you." Oliver nodded once, then scribbled something down, his handwriting small and neat. He didn't ask another question. I watched Daniel glance at his son, then away again, as though looking too long might burn him. Without another word, he turned to the front door. The October wind slipped in as he opened it, bringing the smell of wet leaves. For a moment, the draft lifted the corner of the rug in the hall, the same rug Claire had chosen, because the colors felt warm. He didn't notice. He stepped out. The door closed behind him with a click so soft it barely seemed final. But in my chest, it echoed like the slam of a cell door. Oliver stayed at the table, head bowed over his homework, the pen still moving. I knew that focus. It was the same mask I'd worn when my own father left. I crossed the room and stood beside him. "You all right?" "Love." He looked up at me with eyes that were far too old for his 14 years. "I told you last month, didn't I? He's been half gone for ages." I wanted to deny it, to reassure him, but the words stuck, because deep down, I knew he was right. What I didn't know, what I couldn't yet imagine, was that my quiet, studious grandson was already 3 steps ahead of both me and Daniel. And that night's departure wasn't the end of the story. It was the opening move in a game Daniel didn't even realize he was playing. The house felt heavier without him, though the weight he'd left behind was more silence than absence. I busied myself in the kitchen, clattering mugs about as if the sound might fill the gap. The clock above the kettle ticked in stubborn rhythm, each second reminding me that Daniel was getting further down the road. Oliver hadn't moved from the dining table. His exercise book lay open, pen still in hand, but the nib was pressed to the paper without writing. The lamp lit half his face, leaving the other in shadow. I sat down opposite him, my tea cooling between my palms. "You've not touched that homework for 10 minutes, I said softly. He gave a small shrug. "Doesn't matter." "It does matter. You've always said—" He cut me off gently, his voice almost too calm. "How long do you think before he calls?" The question caught me off guard. "He said he would." That's not what I asked. His eyes lifted to meet mine. They were steady, not angry, not even sad, just certain. I hesitated. "I don't know." "I do," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "He won't, not properly. Maybe a text here and there to make himself feel better, but nothing real." I wanted to tell him not to be so cynical, that fathers sometimes needed time to sort themselves out. But the truth stuck in my throat. Oliver had lived with the slow erosion of Daniel's presence. He'd noticed the missed parents' evenings, the unanswered messages. This wasn't cynicism, it was recognition. He reached for his pencil case, unzipped it with deliberate slowness, and slid his maths homework inside. "It's fine. Grandma, I knew he'd go eventually." "You knew." He nodded. "He's been clearing things. Little stuff. His watch from the shelf, the cufflinks Claire gave him, even the spare charger from the drawer. Thought I wouldn't notice." I blinked. I hadn't noticed. Oliver got up and carried his bag to the stairs. At the bottom step, he paused. "Do you want me to lock the door?" I almost laughed, the sort of brittle laugh that cracks before it reaches your mouth. "No need. He's not coming back tonight." The floorboards above creaked as he moved into his room. I stayed at the table, staring at the steam curling from my forgotten tea. Somewhere outside, the wind pushed rain against the windows, the drops racing each other down the glass. For a moment, I allowed myself to picture Daniel at some dimly lit bar, a pint in front of him and no thought of home. That image hurt, but what hurt more was the thought that Oliver's mind was probably drawing a similar picture. Later, I passed his room on the way to bed. The light was off, but I could hear the faint scratch of pen on paper, then the click of a laptop lid closing. He was awake. I knew that sound. It was the same one I'd made on nights when I couldn't sleep after Claire's funeral. But I didn't knock. He deserved his privacy, and I told myself, rest. What I didn't realize was that his calm tonight wasn't resignation alone. It was the stillness before movement, the kind you see in a cat just before it pounces. Oliver wasn't just accepting the loss of his father. He was already thinking about what that loss meant and what he might have to do next. The rain hadn't stopped all night. It drummed against the roof, a slow, relentless beat, like the ticking of an unseen clock. I woke around 1:30, unsure what had roused me until I noticed the faint glow under my bedroom door. Light. From downstairs, pulling my dressing gown tight, I padded into the hall. The floorboards groaned under my weight, their familiar protests swallowed by the storm outside. At the end of the landing, Oliver's room door was ajar. A dim blue light spilled out the unmistakable hue of a laptop screen. I tapped gently. "Oliver." No answer. Pushing the door open, I found him hunched at his desk, eyes narrowed at a spreadsheet open on the screen. Lines of numbers scrolled down in neat columns, but his fingers were still hovering over the trackpad. "What are you doing up at this hour?" I whispered. Stepping inside, he glanced at me, then back to the laptop. "Couldn't sleep. I needed to check something." I frowned, glancing at the screen. "What is all this?" "It's Dad's account activity," he said plainly, as if telling me what the weather was like. I blinked. "His what?" Oliver tapped the corner of the keyboard, pulling up a login page already filled in. His online banking, passwords the same as it's always been, Claire 2010. He's never changed it. I felt my mouth go dry. "Oliver, that's not..." I know, he cut in gently, but I had to look. Grandma, your savings account has 12 pounds left in it. The words landed like a cold splash. I leaned over his shoulder. The screen confirmed it, the balance staring back at me in cruel, black font. I don't understand, I murmured. I do, Oliver said, and there was no triumph in his tone, only grim certainty. He clicked another tab, revealing a folder of screenshots, each one stamped with dates and transaction IDs. He's been moving money for months, little amounts first, then bigger ones, and not just from your account. He clicked again, bringing up a document with a name at the top, Vanessa Morris. Who is that? I asked, my voice almost breaking. Her, the one he's with, Oliver said quietly. She works at a finance firm in town, Meridian Financial. I've seen them together twice near the station. I didn't say anything because, well, I wasn't sure. But now he gestured at the screen. I scrolled through the evidence joint withdrawals, transfers marked as loan repayments to accounts I didn't recognize, and a string of credit applications in my name all within the past 6 months. Identity theft, Oliver said simply, as though it were homework vocabulary. They're not just taking your money. They're using your name to get more. My stomach turned. Why would he? How could he? Oliver leaned back, his face lit by the screen's cold glow. Because she knows how to do it. And he knows you won't see it coming. That's why he left tonight before you noticed. Probably planning to clear out whatever's left and disappear. I pressed a hand to my forehead. It was too much the image of Daniel's slate eyes as he told me there was no family, now fused with the truth that he'd been dismantling ours piece by piece. How do you even know all this? I asked, my voice trembling. Oliver hesitated. I've been watching. The bank app on his phone isn't password protected. I started noticing odd payments months ago, so I copied them down. Tonight, when he left his jacket in the hall, I checked again. That's when I saw the withdrawals from your account and the loan in your name approved last week. I stared at him, equal parts stunned and proud, though the pride was tainted by the circumstances. You shouldn't have had to do this, I said softly. Neither should you, he replied. And for a moment, the room was utterly still, except for the rain. The enormity of it all pressed in the empty savings, the betrayal, the way Daniel had walked past Claire's broken photo without a flicker of care. Oliver shut the laptop and turned to me. We can stop them, but we have to act before they move the rest. The determination in his voice sent a shiver through me. My grandson, 14, quiet, steady, had just stepped into a role no child should have to play. And yet, in that moment, I believed him. I pulled the desk chair closer and sat beside him. All right, Oliver, tell me what you've got in mind. He opened the laptop again, the screen flaring to life. First, we gather everything. Screenshots, bank statements, emails if we can get them. Then we take it to the right people. The police, he nodded, and the bank, and maybe the press, if they won't listen. But we need to be smart. I looked at him, this boy who'd spent the evening doing homework, while quietly preparing for battle. Somewhere between the rain and the numbers on that screen, I realized something. Daniel had underestimated the wrong person, and so had I. By morning, the rain had given way to a dull, gray drizzle, the kind of weather that feels like it's hanging about just to make sure you don't forget it's there. Oliver was already at the kitchen table, laptop open, toast untouched. The glow of the screen reflected in his tea, now cold. You've been at it all night, I asked, pouring myself a coffee. He shook his head, slept for about an hour, woke up thinking about something, and, well, here we are. He turned the laptop toward me. On the screen was a smiling woman in a corporate headshot, sharp navy blazer, hair swept into a neat chignon, eyes that somehow managed to look both welcoming and calculating. Beneath it, Vanessa Morris, senior accounts manager, Meridian Financial Services. That's her, Oliver said, his voice clipped. Daniel's girlfriend. I stared at the image, something twisting in my stomach. You're certain? He tapped another tab. It was a social media profile photos of her at charity galas, business conferences, the odd champagne reception. In several shots, there was Daniel, just at the edge of the frame, smiling in that too polished way he saved for strangers. They've been careful, Oliver said. Never together in the main photo, but if you look in the background, he zoomed in on one picture. There was Daniel, leaning against the bar, watching her. The bile in my throat was joined by something sharper fury. What's her part in all this? Oliver opened a folder labeled Morris Evidence. Inside were PDFs of court records, articles clipped from local news, and screenshots from online forums. She's been in trouble before, he said, clicking open a file. Suspended 2 years ago for breach of client confidentiality. They called it a misunderstanding. It wasn't. She was moving money from elderly clients into shell accounts, then reinvesting it through fake portfolios. I scanned the document. The names of her victims blurred together, but the pattern was clear: widows, retirees, small business owners who trusted her, never convicted. Oliver went on, because the company settled quietly and she resigned. A year later, she's back at Meridian, probably because they think no one will dig up the old mess. He pulled up another file, a scanned email chain. My name was in it. Where did you get this? I asked sharply. Public Court Archive, he said, almost sheepishly. It's from a civil case she filed against a former employer for wrongful dismissal. They submitted her work emails as evidence. The email in question was to Daniel. It was short, almost casual. She's got more than enough in her savings. Older people don't check as often. We can use that. The she was me. I felt my chest tighten, and for a moment I had to grip the table. So this wasn't some sudden decision to leave. It was planned. Oliver nodded. Months, maybe longer. I think they were testing the waters at first, seeing how much they could move without you noticing. Then they started applying for loans in your name. Here. He opened yet another file, an application form for a $15,000 personal loan. My name printed neatly at the top. The signature looked like mine, but I'd never touched it. She forged that, I whispered. Probably both of them, Oliver said. He knows your handwriting. She knows the process. Together, they're dangerous. The word dangerous sat between us like a heavy stone. Oliver leaned back in his chair. They're not just taking from you, Grandma. They're doing it to others. 2. I found another name, Arthur McKinnon. 72. Same pattern, account drained. Loans in his name, all through Meridian Financial. He lives over in Hammersmith. I stared at my grandson, 14 years old, and yet he'd pieced together a web of deceit that would have taken most people months. What's your plan? I asked. We gather everything, he said simply. Every victim we can find, every transaction. Then we give it to the police, the bank, and maybe a journalist who will actually listen. We don't just stop them. We make sure they can't do it again. I felt a flicker of something, not just pride, but a kind of awe. Claire used to say Oliver had an old head on young shoulders. This morning, I saw exactly what she meant. He clicked through one last photo before closing the laptop. Vanessa and Daniel, walking out of a hotel in Canary Wharf. She was laughing. He was carrying a small suitcase. They looked, to anyone passing by, like just another couple on a weekend away. But I knew better now. They weren't just running away from us. They were running a game, one that had just found its first serious opposition. The drizzle hadn't let up, but the day felt sharper somehow, like the air itself knew something was about to shift. Oliver was at the table again, same spot. But this time his laptop screen wasn't showing social media profiles or archived articles. It was a government web portal, the crest of the Metropolitan Police in the corner. What's this? I asked, setting down a fresh pot of tea. Action, he said, without looking up. I'm filing a fraud report. Multiple counts of identity theft, financial abuse of the elderly, conspiracy to commit fraud. And he clicked a drop-down menu with more confidence than most adults would manage. Breach of fiduciary duty. I watched as he uploaded screenshots, bank statements, even the forged loan application. Each file attached felt like a small stone added to a wall we were building between us and them. Won't they just ignore it? I asked quietly. Not if it's thorough, he replied. And not if it's not just you. I've included Arthur McKinnon's case. And there's another Margaret Layton, 79. Found her name on one of the leaked email chains. Same pattern. I tracked her through the electoral register and called her this morning. You called her? Oliver nodded. She thought I was a scammer at first. Then I read out her bank's transaction history from 2 months ago. The exact withdrawals Vanessa made. She cried. Grandma, proper, shaking voice crying, said no one had believed her. The pride that swelled in my chest was quickly chased by a pang of worry. Oliver, this is dangerous ground. They're not just dishonest. They're careless. He cut in, and that's how we'll win. He tapped the trackpad, pulling up an email draft addressed to Compliance Meridian Financial, Co. UK, Vanessa's employer. He explained, They'll have to investigate if they get credible evidence. I'm sending them copies of her previous suspension record, the forged documents, and the photos of her with Daniel. They can't ignore that she's handling client accounts. It's a massive liability. The audacity of it took me a moment to process. You think they'll fire her? I think they'll have no choice. Oliver said, eyes still fixed on the screen. Even if they want to protect her, the regulators won't let this slide once they see it. I sat down beside him, my hand brushing against his on the table. You've thought this through, haven't you? He gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. Been thinking about it since I first saw her with him. I didn't know all the details back then, but I knew she wasn't just some friend from work. She had that look, like she already owned something that wasn't hers yet. The kettle whistled softly behind us, but neither of us moved to pour. Oliver hit send, a quiet click, but it felt like the crack of a starter's pistol. What now? I asked. Now we wait, he said, but not for long. People like Vanessa, they're careful when they're winning, sloppy when they're cornered. The first sign will be her calling Daniel in a panic. Then he'll call you, pretending it's all a misunderstanding. I tilted my head. And when that happens, he smirked a flash of youth in the midst of all this grim business. We'll let him dig the hole a bit deeper before we hand him the shovel. I wanted to tell him he was too young for metaphors like that. But the truth was, I believed him. By late afternoon, an email pinged into Oliver's inbox. He read it aloud. Thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. An internal investigation has been initiated, and Ms. Morris has been placed on immediate suspension pending review. I let out a slow breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. That was fast. They can't risk her accessing accounts while they check the claims, Oliver explained. It's not guilt yet, but it's the first crack. I pictured Vanessa, somewhere in her immaculate office, being asked to hand over her key card. The shock in her eyes, the first taste of the walls closing in, and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt a flicker of control returning to my life. Oliver closed the laptop with deliberate care. One down, one to go. The next morning, the rain had finally cleared. The kitchen was awash with pale winter sunlight, the kind that makes every speck of dust visible and every shadow sharper. I was at the stove, turning bacon in the pan, when Oliver padded in, still in his dressing gown, hair a tousled mess from sleep, though his eyes were anything but sleepy. You've been up already? I asked. He nodded, sliding into his usual chair, checked my emails, and the police report's been acknowledged, officially logged. But that's not all. There was a note of restrained triumph in his voice, and I braced myself. Oliver pulled out a folder from under his arm, actual paper this time, not just files on a screen. This, he said, is the police's old case file on Vanessa. I requested it under the Freedom of Information Act. They had to redact some bits, but there's still plenty here. He spread the pages across the table. My coffee grew cold as I scanned them. Suspicion of embezzlement, misuse of client funds, targeting of vulnerable account holders, widowers, pensioners, people in care homes. The names leapt off the page. Each one had a number next to it, the sum taken. Fine, 200, 12 300, 48,000. My hand shook. How does Daniel fit into this? Oliver's jaw tightened. He pulled a smaller envelope from the folder and tipped it upside down. Several printed emails slid onto the table. These are from her personal account, he said. They were part of the old investigation. Look, I picked one at random. Daniel met another potential. Lives alone. Recently widowed. You do your charm bit. I'll check the accounts. The date was 2 years ago. My stomach turned. She was recruiting him, or he was part of it already. Oliver shrugged, though there was no uncertainty in his eyes. Maybe both, but by the time they got to you, they knew exactly how to play it. The broken photo, the staged business trip, it was all distraction so they could finish moving the money. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. And the others, he tapped another email. Got Arthur talking about his wife's illness. He trusts me. Accounts are easy to access when they think you're helping. Daniel's name was in the signature line. The bacon sizzled loudly in the background, but it felt a world away from the cold, methodical cruelty laid out in black and white before me. These aren't just opportunists, Oliver said, voice low but steady. They're predators. They pick their marks, plan the whole thing, and make sure there's no one around to fight back. Except, he met my gaze. There is now. I turned back to the frying pan, blinking against the sting in my eyes. What happens next? Oliver took a bite of toast, as if we were discussing nothing more serious than the day's weather. I'm sending this to the other victims, Arthur, Margaret, and the 2 names from this file I could track down. Once they see proof, they'll back the police complaint. That makes it bigger coordinated fraud, harder to ignore. And Daniel, I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my tone. Oliver's expression was unreadable. When he realizes Vanessa's been suspended, he'll panic. He'll call you, maybe even turn up here, trying to play the victim. That's when we hit him with the truth in a way he can't wriggle out of. I plated the bacon and eggs, setting his down first. You make it sound like a chess game. He smirked faintly. It is, but the trick is, he doesn't know he's already in check. I sat opposite him, my fork untouched. Oliver, I'm proud of you. But I hate that you've had to learn all this so young. He shrugged, eyes dropping to his plate. Someone had to, and you've done enough carrying this family. Grandma, it's my turn. His words lodged deep in my chest, heavier than any bank statement or court record. As we ate in silence, the sunlight shifted across the table, catching the edges of the papers between us. Names, numbers, evidence, and underneath it all, the unshakable knowledge that the people I'd once called family had chosen to prey on the vulnerable, and that it would be us, not them, who decided how the story ended. By mid-afternoon, the kitchen table had transformed into what looked like the operations room of a small investigative unit. Envelopes, USB sticks, printed documents, even a roll of brown parcel tape were spread across every available surface. Oliver sat in the middle of it all, pen in hand, writing addresses in a precise, deliberate script that didn't look like it belonged to a 14-year-old. What on earth are you doing now? I asked, setting down 2 mugs of tea among the chaos. Delivering the truth, he said simply. Without looking up, he tapped the nearest stack of envelopes. Each one had a neat label, confidential, evidence of fraud. Inside were photocopies of bank records, email screenshots, and a short, anonymized cover letter explaining the scheme and inviting the recipient to join a joint police complaint. These are going to the victims, Oliver explained. By post, no return address. If they know they're not alone, they'll fight back. And the more of them that go to the police, the harder it is for Daniel and Vanessa to wriggle out. I picked one up and leafed through it. You've kept our names out of these? He nodded. Just enough detail to prove the pattern dates, amounts, the same methods used. Once the police put the pieces together, they'll link it all anyway. On the far end of the table was another pile smaller, but thicker. And these, he hesitated for a fraction of a second. That's for the Financial Conduct Authority. Full dossier on Vanessa, employment history, prior suspensions, current complaints. They'll be obliged to investigate her professional conduct. She won't be able to work in finance again after this. I couldn't help the flicker of satisfaction that warmed me. And Daniel? Oliver's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. That's the best part. From under a folder, he pulled a slim memory stick and set it in the center of the table. Every email, every transaction, every forged document, all neatly organized and cross-referenced. When he tries to plead ignorance, this will prove he was the one setting up the victims. I'm saving it for the right moment. There was a quiet confidence in his voice that unsettled me, not because I doubted him, but because I recognized it. It was the same tone his grandfather used to take when he'd already worked out how to win an argument before it even began. What's the right moment? I asked. When he thinks he's got a way out, Oliver said, that's when you pull the rug. He sealed another envelope with a firm press of his hand. The aim isn't just to punish them, Grandma. It's to make sure no one else ever ends up across the table from them, thinking they're a friend. We worked side by side for the next hour, him writing addresses, me folding letters and sliding in the evidence. Outside, the low winter sun dipped below the rooftops, casting the room in a golden light that made the whole scene feel strangely significant, like we were part of something bigger than just our own survival. When the last envelope was sealed, Oliver leaned back, stretching his arms with a satisfied sigh. Post office tomorrow. After that, we wait. It happened sooner than either of us expected. The next evening, I was halfway through chopping carrots for stew when the landline rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something in my gut knew. I wiped my hands on a tea towel and answered. Mom. The voice was hurried, uneven, and for a split second, I was back in the days when a scraped knee or a broken bike chain was the worst thing Daniel would call me about. But that time was long gone. Mom, I need you to listen. Something's happened. I kept my tone level. I'm listening. It's Vanessa. She's been suspended from work. Someone's been spreading lies about her. And my accounts, they've been frozen. All of them. I can't access anything. The bank says there's an investigation. I think He lowered his voice, as if he thought someone might be listening. I think someone's targeting us. I glanced across the kitchen to where Oliver was sitting at the table, his eyes on me, a calm, knowing look on his face. He mouthed, "Put it on speaker." I pressed the button. "Daniel," I said, "do you remember Arthur McKinnon?" There was a pause. Who, or Margaret Layton, or the two pensioners from Kent whose accounts were emptied within days of you visiting them? Do you remember them? His breath caught. "Mom, I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, you do." I cut in, my voice sharper now. "You know exactly. I've seen the emails. The ones where you told Vanessa how to do your charm bit to make them trust you. The ones where you discussed how much they had in their accounts and how soon you could get it." Silence. Then a brittle laugh. "You've been talking to Oliver, haven't you? He's just a kid." "Mom, you can't take anything he says seriously." "This isn't coming from Oliver," I said, the words cold and steady. "This is coming from the police reports, from the other victims, from the bank statements with your name on the transfers. On the other end of the line." The mask slipped. His voice rose, defensive and ugly. "It wasn't like that. We were borrowing, just borrowing until we could get the business going again. No one was going to get hurt. No one was going to get hurt." I repeated, my voice trembling now not with fear, but with rage. "Tell that to the people who had to sell their homes. Tell that to Arthur, who couldn't pay for his wife's care because of you." In the silence that followed, I could almost hear his mind scrambling for a way out. "Mom, please," he said finally, the desperation creeping in. "They're going to pin all of this on me. Vanessa's already blaming me. You have to help me get a solicitor. Say I was with you." I felt Oliver's eyes on me again, a quiet encouragement to stay the course. "I can't help you, Daniel," I said softly, almost sadly. "Not when you've done exactly what you swore you'd never do. Not when you chose her over your own family and over basic decency." He tried again, faster now, words tripping over each other. "Mom, I'll pay you back. All of it. A sharp knock sounded through the phone line. Muffled voices. "What's going on?" I asked. "They're here," he whispered, panic flooding his voice. "Police." "Mom." The sound of a door opening shouted instructions. A scuffle. Then, clear as day, the metallic click of handcuffs. The line went dead. I set the receiver back in its cradle, my hands steady despite the pounding in my chest. Oliver didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just reached for my hand across the table and squeezed it once. "It's done," he said. The silence after the call ended was almost louder than the conversation itself. No hum of the fridge, no ticking clock, just the faint sound of rain starting again outside. As if the weather had been holding its breath too. Oliver pushed back his chair. "I'm going to check the police blotter. If they've booked him, it'll be logged within the hour." I stayed at the counter, knife still resting on half a carrot, mind replaying the last few seconds of the call. That metallic click of the handcuffs was going to stay with me, not because I enjoyed hearing it, but because it meant the people he'd hurt might finally get something resembling justice. By the time Oliver came back with his laptop, the page was already open. "There," he said, turning it towards me. "Arrested Daniel Morris, 39, charges identity theft, fraudulent transfer of funds, conspiracy to commit embezzlement, location Sunset Motor Lodge." The name of the place made me wince. It was the sort of cut-rate motel that clung to the edge of town, the kind with flickering neon and mismatched curtains. I could picture it him sitting on a bedspread patterned like the 1980s, thinking he could wait out the storm. Only for the storm to come knocking. Oliver kept scrolling. "Looks like Vanessa's name is on here too. Arrested this afternoon at her flat. Charges matches, plus unauthorized access to protected systems." That's the bank. For a moment, we didn't speak. Not because we didn't have words, but because there were too many of them crowding at once. Finally, I took a deep breath. "You realize this means the press will probably get hold of it." Oliver nodded. "And when they do, I'll be ready to make sure the victim's side is heard, not just the headlines about local couple accused." He was right. I'd seen too many stories reduced to sensational snippets, the real human cost lost under a pun-laden headline. If we didn't speak, Daniel and Vanessa's narrative would be the one people heard first. That night, long after the stew had gone cold on the hob, I found myself at the kitchen table again. This time there were no papers, no USB sticks, just me, a notepad, and a pen. I started writing down the names of everyone involved, not just the victims, but also the detectives, the FCA contacts, even the postal clerk who'd helped with Oliver's envelopes without asking too many questions. It felt important to remember that this wasn't a story about two villains finally getting caught. It was about all the people who'd decided, in small but crucial ways, to push back. The next morning brought confirmation. A formal call from Detective Harris, polite, measured, and unmistakably satisfied. "Both parties are in custody," she said. "We've secured the evidence you sent. I don't expect bail to be granted." I thanked her, trying to keep my voice steady. After we hung up, I just sat there for a moment, letting the words sink in. In custody, no bail. Oliver walked in a minute later, hair still damp from his shower. "Well," I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "It's official." He grinned, not the broad, careless grin of a boy, but the sharper, knowing one of someone who's just seen a long plan through. "Good. Now the real work starts." I raised an eyebrow. "The real work? Making sure this never happens again," he said simply. And though I didn't know exactly what that meant yet, I could see from the set of his shoulders that Oliver did. 6 months later, spring had finally made itself known in our corner of the country. The mornings were brighter, the wind less biting, and the garden, which had sat neglected through a winter of court dates and police statements, was showing the first green shoots again. It was the day before Daniel's sentencing when the letter arrived. Heavy paper, embossed crest in the corner, the kind of envelope that looked official enough to make your stomach drop before you even opened it. I slid it open at the kitchen counter. "Notice of restitution." The words leapt out. A formal statement from the Crown Court confirming that funds seized from the defendant's assets would be distributed to victims. 18,400 allocated to our household, with additional payments to follow as other assets were liquidated. It wasn't just the money, though. Heaven knew we needed it after what had been drained. It was the acknowledgement the system had recognized the wrong and was beginning to make it right. Oliver came in from the back garden, sleeves rolled up in soil on his hands. I handed him the letter. He read it twice, then smiled. "It's a start." The next day in court, I sat 2 rows behind the prosecution. Daniel was brought in wearing a suit that hung looser than it had 6 months ago. Vanessa followed, chin high but eyes darting. The judge's voice was steady as stone when the sentences were read. Daniel Morris, 5 years imprisonment for identity theft, fraudulent transfer of funds, and conspiracy to commit embezzlement. Vanessa Shaw, 6 years, with an additional 3-year ban from working in financial services. No outbursts, no last-minute pleas, just the gavel's sharp report and the shuffle of them being led away. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered like gulls, their cameras flashing. One tried to call my name. I kept walking. This wasn't a day for them. It was, however, the day Oliver's idea took its first public step. We'd been talking about it for weeks. A service to help families, especially elderly relatives, safeguard their accounts, spot suspicious activity, and navigate the labyrinth of reporting fraud before it spiraled. He'd even chosen a name, Family Financial Protection Service. That afternoon, we registered the domain name and filed the necessary paperwork. Oliver's eyes shone with the same determined focus he'd had the night he started tracing Daniel's transactions. "We're going to teach people what no one taught us," he said, fingers flying over the keyboard, "and we'll do it for free. Because if you're in trouble, the last thing you need is another bill." In the weeks that followed, we turned the spare bedroom into a home office, the wall above the desk filled with a pinboard map, not of suspects this time, but of families who'd written in for help. Each one was a small reminder that the story wasn't over. But at least now, we were shaping it. The check from the restitution letter arrived a month later. We didn't spend it on a holiday or a new car. Instead, we replaced the broken boiler, caught up on overdue bills, and set aside a small fund to keep the new service running. It felt solid, not flashy, not dramatic, but real. And after months of chaos, real was more than enough. By summer, the house felt different, not just because we'd finally fixed the drafty windows or repainted the flaking hallway, but because the air itself seemed lighter, less haunted by whispered worries about the postman bringing another bill we couldn't pay, less charged with the tension of what might happen next. We downsized in April, trading the big, creaking family home for a smaller terraced house on a quiet street near the park. Some people would have called it a step down, but to me, it felt like a step towards something better. The garden was small but sunlit, and on warm evenings, Oliver and I would sit outside with mugs of tea, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. My days had found a new rhythm. Mornings were for my return to teaching not full-time, but enough to remind me of the satisfaction of a well-run classroom and the curious faces of students who still believed the world could be fair if you tried hard enough, afternoons often saw me in the home office, helping Oliver answer emails from families who'd stumbled into the same kind of trap we had. He'd grown in ways that still caught me off guard. The boy who once sat quietly at the kitchen table, watching the adults make their mistakes, was now a confident young man who could speak to bank managers, police officers, and frightened pensioners with equal ease. One afternoon in July, he came in from a meeting with a local community group, his tie slightly askew, and dropped into the chair opposite me. "They want us to run a workshop," he said, grinning. "First one's next month. They think we could reach 100 people in one go." I felt that swell of pride again, the kind that warms you from the inside, deeper than any medal or certificate could. Of course, the past didn't vanish. Every few weeks, the phone would ring with a number I recognized instantly. The prison. I never answered. Whatever Daniel had to say now, it was too late to unpick the choices he'd made. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would be on my terms and from a distance. Instead, I focused on the people still within reach, on Oliver, on the work we were building, on the small, steady victories that came from seeing someone realize, just in time, that they were about to sign away their savings to a stranger with a smile. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky over the park turned gold, Oliver and I sat in the garden, the air smelling faintly of cut grass. "You know," he said, "if all that hadn't happened, we'd never be here. We wouldn't have this." I thought about that, about the fear, the anger, the cold nights wondering how we'd survive, and then about the people we'd met since. The lives nudged back from the brink, because we'd learned how to see the signs. "You're right," I said quietly. "We made it through, and now we help others do the same." He lifted his mug in a small toast to surviving. I clinked mine against his, and to never going back. The streetlights flickered on, and somewhere in the distance, a train rumbled past carrying people forward, towards somewhere new, just like us. At its heart, this story is about more than betrayal and justice. It is about resilience, vigilance, and the quiet power of reclaiming control over your life. It reminds us that trust, once broken, can never be taken for granted again, and that even the people we love most are capable of choices that harm us deeply. But it also shows that, no matter our age or circumstances, we can take steps to protect ourselves and those around us. For many in later life, financial fraud isn't just about losing money. It's about the loss of security, independence, and dignity. This experience teaches that we must be proactive, checking our accounts regularly, questioning unusual requests, and not being afraid to seek help. It's about recognizing the warning signs early, whether they come from a stranger or from within the family, and acting decisively to prevent harm. Perhaps most importantly, it shows that recovery is possible. Life after betrayal can still hold meaning, purpose, and connection, sometimes even more so, because we have faced what we feared most and endured. The road forward may be smaller in scale, but richer in trust and self-respect. If you face something similar, know that you are not alone, and that it is never too late to learn, to protect what's yours, and to help others do the same. Take a moment today to review your own safeguards. Talk openly with those you trust, and stay alert. Wishing you strength, clarity, and the peace of knowing you are in control of your future.